Hey, what is going on guys, Max Settings here, and welcome back to another review. So in today's video we are going to be taking a look at the Massdrop X Meze 99 Noir. So we're going to get things started off here with some basic specs. So these headphones use a 40mm dynamic driver. They have a frequency response of 15 to 25,000 Hertz. They have an impedance of 32 ohms and a sensitivity of 103 dB per milliwatt. So Massdrop claims they haven't done anything to these sonically to change them over the 99 Classic. They claim that they've only done aesthetic changes to these, which is darkening the wood and blacking out the gold hardware from the 99 Classic. And I've not had a 99 Classic at home to listen to for a long time, so I can't 100% confirm that, but I don't see any reason why they would lie. But anyway, moving on into the build. So the build on these overall is pretty good. So the headband structure here is metal. It's quite large, as you can see there. It has a nice comfort strap that's pleather. It's pretty thick with some good padding. It says 99 Noir there at the top. And it uses what I call like the AKG elastic style headband self-adjusting mechanism, which some people love, some people hate. Your mileage may vary on that. Little Meze logo right there. The cups swivel. You got the pads there, which we'll go over the pads a little bit, and wood cups. And the one thing I want to mention about these wood cups is they actually scuff quite easily. There's a lot of little micro marks on it just from sitting them down on a table or handling them or pulling out the wire. The wood scuffs pretty easily. And I don't know if you can see right here, if the camera will get it. Yeah, like right there, there's like a little chip in each of the cups from when I was changing the pads, and it slipped out of my hands and it fell like 2 or 3 inches and it chipped the cups, which is not good. That the wood's not very durable, which we'll get to a little bit later when we talk about their intended purpose. Alright, so continuing off the build, this is the wire that they come with. This headphone uses 3.5mm connectors, standard 3.5mm mono connectors, and this cable is, I think that's a 6-foot cable, I believe. It's braided below the split. The camera will grab it. Come here. And it's rubber above the split. There it goes. And they just 3.5mm, and they include a 1/4 inch adapter. However, interestingly, it's a 4-pole, and it's not 4-pole for balanced. It's a 4-pole because there is a microphone module there with a big button. And you may be thinking, wait, why are they putting a microphone module on these? You'll see why in a second. This cable's not the greatest. It's a little janky, but it works. Although of note, it's really hard to replace because these 3.5mm connectors are so tiny. My Periap cables didn't work on these. I have a Noir cable that didn't work. The only one that I had that worked was like a new Fantasia cable, like those cheap $15 headphone cables they have on Amazon that some people buy. I'll link to that one if you want a replacement cable for these. But yeah, not a very good cable on the Noirs here. Alright, so the Noirs also include this carrying case here. It's a nice hard carrying case with the Meze logo on it. Just headphones just go right in there. Nice that they include that, especially on a headphone at $199. Always nice to see a carrying case. Okay, and power real quick. So, like I mentioned, these are 32 ohms at 103 dB per milliwatt. And that makes these very easy to drive. These are probably the easiest headphones to drive that I currently own. I think these are the least I have to take my amp up. And I mentioned last week in the HE560 review how the volume on the RME works. And I think these are sitting below -40 dB most of the time on most songs. So yeah, these are incredibly easy to drive, easily driven off of a phone or any portable devices. You don't need an amp to get these going. Alright, so comfort on these. So the comfort you shouldn't have too many problems with. They're overall pretty comfortable. Up top, they have a nice thick padded suspension strap with the self-adjust mechanism. Works pretty well. So I think they're pretty good up on the top of your head. The weight's also not too much, so they shouldn't get to you. Especially with the wood, it's not very thick wood, it's kind of a thin wood. The area where you might have problems is with the pads. They're fairly shallow, and one of them, the hole is not as big, which we'll get over the difference between the pads here in a second. But anyway, yeah, so your ear is probably going to hit in these a little bit, but there's not too much clamp, and there's some foam under here that helps a lot. So I think these are probably gonna be an hour to 2 hour use, at least for me personally, but your mileage may vary on that. So comfort overall, fairly decent. Okay, so now we're gonna get on into the sound of these. All right, so the sound of these is a bit interesting, to say the least. So if you read some of the posts on Massdrop from the people that produced this headphone, they said that these are supposed to be more of a fun headphone for enjoying music rather than I don't know if I want to say like a traditional audiophile headphone where it's all about, the detail and being really well refined. And these were supposed to be a little more fun. And yeah, they took that to heart, maybe a little too much, but yeah, so let's get things started off with the bass. So what even is the bass on these things? So the bass on these is shelved, like from 20 to 300 hertz is like shelved, like 10 dB above everything else. And they have so much bass. These are fat, PHAT, fat bass on these bad boys right here. And yeah, the bass on these is just stupid. One of the songs that I heard on these while I was testing was Billie Eilish's Zanny. And there's a part where it's like a bass line, and these things sound like an old subwoofer where they just make like that wub sound really fast where it's like whoa, 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 like that. And it was like just the craziest bass experience I've had with a headphone in a long time. They're just like shaking. And yeah, the bass on these is just absolutely stupid. Now, it's not very good bass. It's pretty muddy, and it tends to muddy other things up too, as we'll get to in a second. So after that 300 hertz bass shelf, the mid-range just starts to dip down after 300. It just starts coming down, and the lower mids start to dip out quite a bit. And that continues on, and then when we get to the upper mids, it starts to peak back up a little bit. And there seems to be some weird dip at 4K on the measurements that I'm not really hearing, but it could just be me getting confused by how much bass there is. But I think it's just a byproduct of the HATS measurements devices that is showing that massive 4K dip. But after that 4K dip, the treble starts to peak back up at around 5K and comes not in line with the bass, but definitely up probably 5 to 6 dB above where the lower mids were, and still probably 4 to 5 dB below the 20 to 300 bass region on these things. And yeah, so this is now where we are going to have to talk about the difference between the pads. So these pads right here, these are the stock Meze 99 Classic pads, and these have a larger hole than the ones that I have currently on it, which are the OG pads, in quote. And the reason I say that is because when the 99 Classics originally came out, they had a different pad. And for whatever reason, they switched later in the life of these things. Now, I hear from a few other people that the 99 Classic was actually pretty decent with the original pads. And if you look at some of Tile's earliest measurements of them, they actually look pretty decent with the original pads. But for whatever reason, Meze decided to change it later in the life of these things. And it's probably because their supplier went out of business, so they had to change. So that is where they switched to these pads. And I think these are where just like the bass just started to go insane. And based on community feedback, Massdrop asked them to remake the original pads, which is what they claim these are. But looking at measurements between some of mine, which I'm having some problems with, and some other people's measurements of these, these with these pads, which are the OG pads, don't look like Tile's graph with the original pads. So these are not actually the original pads. Once again, probably because the original maker of those is probably no longer in business, so they no longer can produce them, and the new manufacturer can't replicate them for whatever reason. So that's probably why these pads are not original. So what's the difference between the two pads, you might say? So everything I just said about these, with the original pads, take like 3 dB off of the mids and the treble. And that's about the difference with these. These just like cut 3 dB off of everything past 300 hertz and above. So yeah, these just make that bass shelf even worse. These to me are basically unlistenable with the stock pads. It just ruins them so much. The bass is just stupid. And even with these pads, the bass is still stupid, but it's more listenable because that extra bit of treble and mid-range helps a lot. Also above 10K, the air is not that good. And there's a few other things. So the soundstage on these is actually pretty decently wide for a closeback. I was actually surprised. But I think the reason why that is because these things have insane reverb. I don't think I've ever heard reverb in a headphone like this. They just have so much echo because of the cups, and they vibrate so much, especially with bass tracks. Like I've been listening to some like bassy songs on these, and you just hear all the echo and the vibration from the wood. And you're listening to them, and you put your hand like here, like 3 inches from it, and you can just feel the vibrations coming off of the cups from like 3 inches away. And it's crazy how much how much reverb these things have. And on some songs, especially like acoustical and some classical things, it's actually kind of interesting. It gives this like unique kind of hollow, almost like a room kind of sense that's kind of interesting. I don't think it's really well refined, and probably a lot of people wouldn't like it, but it's kind of an interesting effect. Now, that being said, I did listen to a few songs on these that were like classical, where there's not a lot of bass. And it sounds actually pretty decent. You know, the trebles, they come off as a little bit bright because they're a V-shaped signature overall. So when there's no bass playing, the treble is more elevated in the mid, so they come off as kind of bright. And it sounded pretty good. You know, listen to some classical piece, nice piano, violins, or whatever. And then someone hits a cello. And that's when the bass starts to come back in, and it just, boom, just clouds everything out, muddies them up, and just kind of ruins it. So these things actually sound pretty decent as long as nothing is playing that's 300 hertz or below. Once anything starts playing that's 300 hertz or below, it's just game over. It just muddies them up, ruins them, and they just sound, just not that good to me. And there also are a little bit grainy. There's definitely some grain, particularly in the treble region of these, that's noticeable to me. And yeah, so I think these are definitely fun as they were going for, but these are a super mainstream tuning. Like these are just like Beats tuning, that really just elevated, crazy thud, soft, like boomy bass that a lot of like mainstream headphones have, like Beats or I don't know, Skullcandy Crushers or something like that. If you have some friends that are not into audiophile headphones, the kind of friends that you put like an HD6XX on and they say that they're not as good as their Beats, and you have a pair of these, they'd probably like these, but they'd have to get past the brand. But yeah, these are just a really mainstream tuning, and I think like normal people would actually quite enjoy these a lot, but they're not an audiophile headphone in the traditional sense of the word. Now, all that being said, really easy to drive, close back, and a really mainstream tuning. Massdrop is marketing these as portable headphones, which I can kind of see because once again, the case, they're easy to drive, but I have to question a few things about that. Like I mentioned, the wood chips a lot, and I think that'll be a problem for durability, especially in, when out and about, sitting these around your neck or down on a table or something, they're going to scratch up a lot. And also the look. The wood looks decent, but the headband structure is just so big. It's definitely going to stand out in public. I think these are ones that you're going to look kind of weird wearing in public, especially even compared to the two I have on each adjacent side of these, which we'll get to here in a second. But yeah, I think Massdrop is going to sell a lot of these to maybe some normal people or people that kind of like this really normal tuning, really mainstream fun sound. But yeah, these are not an audiophile headphone in any sense of the word. And I have some other things here to compare to that were warm headphones, because these are quite warm. We have the Creative Arvana Live, or the Cal, which these will be getting reviewed at some point, and Massdrop's own THX100. This is a THX100 that I modded to 2.5mm detachable. This is the mahogany version. Now, these two are both also very bassy headphones, but the bass isn't shelved. It just starts kind of elevated, and then just like the rest of the response just starts to just kind of curve down from where the bass is. It's not really just a shelved elevated bass. And yeah, and these two have very similar general FR, but they're different. But the general FR of these two is pretty close. And both of these are just tremendously cleaner than the Noirs are. The Noir is just a lot muddier, and the bass is just too much, and combined with the reverb, it's just weird. I would take a Cal over the Noir. The build on these is worse, comfort's not as good, but they just sound cleaner. They're not as muddy, and the frequency response is just, more normal. And I also think that these have better detail than the Noir does. Noir has decent treble detail, except when there's bass playing. Once the bass plays, the detail's just gone, because it's just, everything's muddied out by how much bass there is. But yeah, the bass detail in these is not very good. And then the Fostex are obviously a lot more money. These are basically double what the Noir cost. But yeah, these clearly outclass those across the board. And I actually think these wouldn't look too weird in public either, or less weird than the Noirs do. The Cals would probably blend in pretty well in public. They don't look that weird either. But yeah, I think those are two things that I have here to compare to that are both pretty fair comparisons. So in conclusion, do I like the Meze Noir? Not particularly. It's not something that I would listen to. Like, it's not an audiophile headphone in the traditional sense. It's kind of fun and kind of interesting, but the bass is just too much and muddies everything up for me. But if you like a really mainstream tuning, you might like these. But for me, they just don't do it. These are not going to end up in my recommended list, and they're not going to end up in my small list of good closed backs. If you have a set, take the stock pads, throw these in the trash. These things are just stupid with the stock pads. Use the ones with the smaller holes. The comfort might be a little bit worse, but it just really helps everything out. The wire is not very good. The case is nice to have. But yeah, I think that the Cal here is a better headphone overall than the Noir, and for way less money, like $70 compared to $200. But build. But anyway, I digress. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of the Meze 99 Noir. I'll have the link in the description of where to buy these if these sound like something that you would like. I'll also link the Cal as well as the better cable for these. I'll also have a link to my Twitter down there, and the MiniDSP EARS graph for these is not going to be there as of the time of uploading. I'm having some difficulties with these things on that thing. It's doing some weird stuff, so I'm going to try to redo it later and possibly add it later on. Also link to my email down there if you want to send me anything, as well as all other relevant information. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. Thanks for watching. Bye.